What happens when the very person you trust the most becomes the architect of your destruction? In a quiet town in Illinois, Pastor Nick Coleman appeared to lead a life of faith and devotion, a respected figure in his community, married to his wife, Betty, for over 2 decades. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life lay a web of deception that would ultimately lead to a shocking act of violence. For years, Nick concealed a secret that would shatter the foundation of his marriage. He was gay. Married to Betty not out of love, but to mask his true identity, he lived a double life, engaging in self-pleasure to suppress his desires. When Betty brought home a homeless teenage boy named Murphy, Nick found himself drawn into a dangerous affair that would change everything. One fateful day, Betty returned home unexpectedly, only to stumble upon the unthinkable, her husband in bed with the very boy she had taken in. The betrayal cut deep, igniting a firestorm of emotions that would lead to a chilling ultimatum. Betty would file for divorce. But Nick, terrified of losing his reputation, his church, and the life he had built on lies, made a decision that would seal Betty's fate. He orchestrated a cold-blooded murder, hiring assassins to eliminate the one person who threatened to expose him. As the investigation unfolds, secrets unravel and the truth comes to light. How far will one man go to protect his hidden life? Join us as we explore this harrowing tale of betrayal, love, and the ultimate price of deception. As we delve deeper into this shocking story, we invite you to reflect on the themes of betrayal and the hidden lives we often overlook. This case serves as a stark reminder of the complexities of human relationships and the devastating consequences that can arise when secrets are kept. We want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Pastor Nick's actions? How do you believe trust can be rebuilt after such a profound betrayal? If you or someone you know has experienced similar struggles, sharing your story can help shed light on these important issues. Your experiences matter, and they can inspire others who may be facing their own challenges. Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends and family to raise awareness about the hidden struggles many face in silence. By spreading this story, we can foster a community of understanding and support. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more gripping true crime stories that explore the depths of human behavior and the quest for justice. Join us on this journey as we uncover the truth behind the headlines and give a voice to those who have been silenced. Your engagement is crucial in helping us reach a larger audience and make a difference. Thank you for being part of our community. In the small town of Illinois, where everyone knew each other's names and secrets were hard to keep, a new chapter was about to unfold in the lives of Pastor Nick and Betty Coleman. It began on an ordinary day, one that would change everything. Betty, with her compassionate heart, had always been drawn to helping those in need. It was this very trait that led her to cross paths with a homeless teenage boy named Murphy. Murphy was a 17-year-old with a troubled past, having faced hardships that no child should endure. He had been living on the streets, struggling to find his place in a world that seemed indifferent to his plight. When Betty encountered him, she saw not just a boy in need, but a young man with potential, a talent for singing that could bring joy to others. With her nurturing spirit, she invited him into their home, believing she could provide him with the support he desperately needed. As Murphy settled into the Coleman household, it quickly became apparent that he was more than just a guest. His presence filled the home with a youthful energy that had been missing for years. Betty, eager to help him find his footing, encouraged him to join the church choir. It was here that Murphy's talent truly shone. His voice, rich and soulful, captivated the congregation, earning him praise and admiration. The choir became a sanctuary for him, a place where he could express himself and escape the harsh realities of his life. For Pastor Nick, Murphy's arrival was a double-edged sword. On one hand, he admired the boy's talent and the joy he brought to the choir. On the other, he felt an undeniable attraction to Murphy that stirred emotions he had long suppressed. As they spent more time together, Nick found himself drawn to Murphy's youthful exuberance and vulnerability. Their conversations, initially innocent, began to delve deeper, exploring dreams, fears, and the complexities of life. Murphy, in turn, looked up to Nick as a father figure, someone who provided guidance and support. He admired the pastor's charisma and the way he commanded the attention of the congregation. But as their bond grew stronger, so did the tension between them. Nick's internal struggle intensified. He was torn between his responsibilities as a husband and father and the burgeoning feelings he had for this young boy who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. The emotional connection between Nick and Murphy deepened as they shared late-night conversations, often discussing their hopes and aspirations. Murphy confided in Nick about his troubled past, revealing the pain of abandonment and the longing for acceptance. Nick, in turn, shared his own struggles, albeit in a more guarded manner. He spoke of the pressures of being a pastor, the expectations placed upon him, and the loneliness that often accompanied his role. As the weeks passed, the lines between friendship and something more began to blur. Nick found himself captivated by Murphy's laughter, his passion for music, and the way he seemed to understand him in a way that no one else did. The thrill of their connection was intoxicating, a dangerous escape from the confines of his marriage. Each stolen glance, each lingering touch, ignited a fire within Nick that he had long thought extinguished. Betty, blissfully unaware of the growing bond between her husband and Murphy, continued to support the boy, encouraging him to pursue his passion for music. She saw the positive changes in Murphy and felt a sense of pride in her decision to help him. However, the more time Nick spent with Murphy, the more he began to withdraw from Betty. The emotional distance that had plagued their marriage for years now widened, creating a chasm that would soon become impossible to bridge. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over their home, Nick and Murphy found themselves alone in the church after choir practice. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and as they sat together, the weight of their feelings became undeniable. In that moment, the world outside faded away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of intimacy. It was here, in the quiet sanctuary of the church, that their relationship crossed a line. A simple touch of hands turned into a lingering embrace, and before they knew it, they were lost in a moment that would forever alter the course of their lives. The thrill of the forbidden ignited a passion that had been suppressed for far too long. In that instant, Nick felt alive, liberated from the constraints of his hidden life. But with that liberation came a heavy burden, the knowledge that their actions could lead to devastating consequences. As the affair blossomed, Nick found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. The exhilaration of being with Murphy was intoxicating, yet the guilt of betraying Betty loomed over him like a dark cloud. He was living a double life, torn between the love he had for his wife and the undeniable connection he felt with Murphy. Each secret rendezvous brought both joy and anguish, a constant reminder of the precarious balance he was trying to maintain. The stakes were rising and the tension was palpable. Nick was playing a dangerous game, one that could shatter the lives of everyone involved. As he navigated this treacherous path, he couldn't shake the feeling that the truth would eventually come to light, and when it did, the fallout would be catastrophic. In the shadows of their secret, the stage was set for a tragedy that would leave a community reeling and a family torn apart. The question remained, how far would Nick go to protect his hidden life, and what would be the ultimate cost of his betrayal? It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the small town of Illinois, the kind of day that seemed unremarkable at first glance. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the Coleman household. Inside, Pastor Nick Coleman was lost in a moment of bliss, unaware that the fabric of his carefully constructed life was about to unravel. Betty, having finished her errands earlier than expected, pulled into the driveway, her mind occupied with thoughts of dinner and the choir practice scheduled for that evening. As she stepped inside, the familiar scent of home enveloped her, but something felt off. The house was unusually quiet, a stark contrast to the lively atmosphere that usually filled their home. As she moved through the hallway, Betty noticed the door to their bedroom was slightly ajar. A sense of unease washed over her, but she brushed it aside, attributing it to her imagination. After all, Nick had been working late at the church more often, and she had grown accustomed to the silence. But as she approached the door, a strange instinct compelled her to push it open. What she saw next would forever change the course of her life. There in their bed lay her husband, Nick, entwined with Murphy, the very boy she had taken in to help. The shock hit her like a physical blow, rendering her momentarily speechless. Time seemed to freeze as her mind struggled to comprehend the scene before her. The laughter and intimacy shared between them shattered her world, exposing the betrayal that had been hidden in plain sight. "Nick," she gasped, her voice trembling with disbelief. The sound of her voice pierced the bubble of their secret, and in an instant the room was filled with tension. Nick's eyes widened in horror as he scrambled to pull away from Murphy, the reality of his actions crashing down around him. "Betty, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, but the words failed him. The weight of his betrayal hung heavy in the air, and the silence that followed was deafening. Murphy, caught in the crossfire of their confrontation, quickly dressed and fled the room, leaving Nick to face the storm that was about to erupt. Betty's heart raced as a whirlwind of emotions surged within her, anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. "How could you do this to me?" she demanded, her voice rising with each word. "After everything we've built together, how could you betray me like this?" Nick, desperate to salvage the remnants of their marriage, reached out to her, his eyes pleading. "Please, Betty, just listen to me. It's not what it looks like. I never meant for you to find out like this." His voice was laced with panic, but Betty could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of losing everything he had worked so hard to maintain. "What do you mean it's not what it looks like?" she shot back, her voice trembling with hurt. "You're in bed with a teenage boy. How can you possibly justify this?" The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, and she felt as if the ground beneath her was crumbling away. Nick's mind raced as he searched for the right words, but the truth was a tangled web of lies and deceit. "I was confused, Betty. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could keep it hidden, that it wouldn't affect our life together. I love you, I do." His voice cracked, desperation seeping through his facade. Betty's heart ached at his words, but the pain of his betrayal overshadowed any lingering affection. "You love me?" she echoed, incredulity lacing her tone. "You've been lying to me for years, Nick. You've built a life on lies, and now I find you with him?" The tears streamed down her face, each drop a testament to the love she had poured into their marriage, now tainted by betrayal. In that moment, Nick's world began to collapse. He could see the hurt in Betty's eyes, the realization that the man she had trusted was not who he claimed to be. "Please, Betty, don't tell anyone. If this gets out, it will ruin everything. My career, the church, our family. I can't lose you," he pleaded, his voice breaking. Betty stood frozen, torn between the love she once felt for her husband and the overwhelming sense of betrayal that threatened to consume her. The weight of his plea hung in the air, a desperate attempt to maintain control over a situation that had spiraled out of his grasp. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, the conflict evident in her eyes. Just keep this between us. I'll do anything to make it right. I'll go to counseling, I'll change. Just please don't tell anyone," he implored, his desperation palpable. As Betty processed his words, she felt a surge of conflicting emotions. The thought of keeping such a monumental secret weighed heavily on her conscience. Could she really protect him after what he had done? The silence that followed was suffocating, each second stretching into eternity as they stood on the precipice of a decision that would alter their lives forever. Finally, with a heavy heart, she nodded, though the decision felt like a betrayal of its own. "Fine," she said, her voice trembling. "But this doesn't change what you've done. I need time to think." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Nick standing in the wreckage of their marriage, the reality of his actions crashing down around him. As Betty left the room, the gravity of the situation settled in. The secret they now shared would bind them in ways neither could foresee, setting off a chain of events that would lead to devastating consequences. The facade of their perfect life had shattered, and the fallout was just beginning. In the days that followed, the tension between them simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had altered their lives. The question loomed large: how long could they maintain the illusion of normalcy in a world where everything had changed? In the days following the shocking discovery of her husband's betrayal, Betty Coleman found herself trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. The once vibrant home she had shared with Pastor Nick now felt like a prison, each room echoing with memories tainted by deceit. The laughter that once filled the air was replaced by a suffocating silence, and the weight of her decision loomed heavily over her. Betty spent countless hours replaying the moment she caught Nick and Murphy in bed, the image seared into her mind. How could the man she had loved and trusted betray her in such a profound way? The emotional fallout was overwhelming, leaving her feeling lost and alone. She felt a growing sense of disgust, not just towards Nick, but towards herself for having been so blind to the cracks in their marriage. In her solitude, Betty turned to her sister, Laura, a barrister with a sharp mind and a compassionate heart. They had always shared a close bond, and in this moment of crisis, Betty needed her sister's guidance more than ever. One evening, as they sat together in Laura's cozy living room, the weight of the conversation hung heavy in the air. "Betty, you don't have to go through this alone," Laura said gently, her eyes filled with concern. "You deserve to be happy, to be with someone who respects you. Have you thought about what you want to do?" Betty sighed, her heart aching at the thought of her shattered marriage. "I don't know, Laura. Part of me wants to fight for our family, to try and make it work. But another part of me feels so disgusted by what he did. How can I ever trust him again?" Her voice trembled as she spoke, the internal conflict evident in her tone. Laura leaned forward, her expression serious. "You have to think about your future, Betty. This isn't just about Nick, it's about you and your happiness. If you stay, you'll always wonder if he's being honest with you. You deserve better than that." As the conversation unfolded, Betty felt a flicker of hope amidst the turmoil. Laura's words resonated deeply, igniting a spark of determination within her. But the fear of the unknown loomed large. What would life look like without Nick? How would she navigate the complexities of divorce, especially with a husband who was a respected figure in their community? The thought of filing for divorce sent waves of anxiety coursing through her. She had always envisioned a life filled with love and companionship, not one marked by separation and heartache. Yet, the reality of her situation was undeniable. The betrayal had shattered the foundation of their marriage, and the trust that once bound them was irreparably broken. In the days that followed, Betty found herself oscillating between anger and sadness. She would sit in silence, staring out the window, lost in thought. The memories of their life together flooded her mind, family dinners, vacations, and the dreams they had shared. But now, those memories felt tainted, overshadowed by the betrayal that had come to define their relationship. As she contemplated her future, Betty began to feel a growing sense of empowerment. She realized that she had the right to choose her own path, to reclaim her life from the shadows of Nick's deceit. The thought of filing for divorce became less daunting and more like a necessary step towards healing. One evening, after another difficult conversation with Laura, Betty made a decision. She would file for divorce. It was a choice that filled her with both fear and relief. The fear of the unknown loomed large, but the relief of taking control of her life was intoxicating. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. With her sister's support, Betty began to gather the necessary documents, preparing for the legal battle that lay ahead. Each signature felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders, a step towards reclaiming her identity. But as she navigated the complexities of divorce, the emotional turmoil continued to swirl within her. The thought of facing Nick in court filled her with dread. How would she confront the man who had shattered her trust? The anger she felt towards him was palpable, yet there was also a lingering sadness for the life they had built together. The conflicting emotions left her feeling raw and exposed, as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure of what lay below. As the days turned into weeks, Betty's resolve only strengthened. She began to envision a future free from the shadows of betrayal, a life where she could rediscover herself and her passions. The thought of starting anew, of finding happiness outside the confines of her marriage, became a beacon of hope in her darkest moments. But even as she prepared to take this monumental step, the fear of the fallout loomed large. The community they had built together would undoubtedly be affected by the divorce. Gossip would spread, and the judgment of others would be hard to bear. Yet deep down, Betty knew that she had to prioritize her own well-being. In the quiet moments of reflection, she found strength in the knowledge that she was not alone. With Laura by her side, she felt empowered to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The decision to file for divorce was not just a legal action. It was a declaration of her independence, a commitment to reclaiming her life and her happiness. As she prepared to take the next steps, Betty felt a sense of clarity wash over her. The path ahead would be difficult, but it was a journey she was ready to embark upon. The betrayal had changed her, but it would not define her. With each passing day, she grew more determined to forge a new life, one where she could heal and ultimately thrive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the small town of Illinois, Pastor Nick Coleman found himself ensnared in a web of desperation and fear. The weight of his betrayal hung heavily on his shoulders, and the walls of his carefully constructed life were closing in. With Betty poised to file for divorce, Nick's mind raced with thoughts of exposure and the potential loss of everything he had built. His family, his reputation, and his position as a respected pastor. In the dark recesses of his mind, a sinister plan began to take shape. The thought of losing his church, the congregation that had looked up to him for years, was unbearable. He could not allow Betty's revelations to destroy him. As he paced the dimly lit confines of his study, the idea of silencing her became increasingly appealing. It was a chilling realization, but in his twisted logic, it seemed like the only way out. Nick's desperation led him to seek out individuals who operated in the shadows, people who could help him execute his dark plan. He turned to the dark web, a place where anonymity reigned and morality was often discarded. It was here that he found a group of assassins, individuals who specialized in carrying out contracts for those willing to pay the price. The chilling nature of his decision sent shivers down his spine, but the fear of exposure drowned out any lingering sense of morality. In a series of encrypted messages, Nick communicated with the assassins, outlining his intentions with a cold detachment that belied the gravity of his actions. He discussed the logistics of the murder, specifying that it needed to look like an accident, a tragic event that would leave no trace of foul play. The chilling nature of the plan was almost surreal, as he detailed how he wanted it to unfold. "Make it quick and clean," he typed, his fingers trembling as he pressed send. "I can't afford any mistakes." The assassins responded with a chilling efficiency, outlining their terms and the payment structure. Nick was instructed to pay in Bitcoin, a currency that offered anonymity and made tracing the transaction nearly impossible. The thought of using digital currency to facilitate such a heinous act sent a wave of nausea through him, but he pushed the feeling aside. He was in too deep now and there was no turning back. As the days passed, Nick's anxiety grew. He was scheduled to leave for a preaching engagement that weekend, a trip that would provide the perfect cover for the murder. The thought of what would happen at home while he was away gnawed at him, but he convinced himself that it was necessary. He had to maintain his composure, to act as if everything was normal, even as he prepared to orchestrate the unthinkable. On the day of his departure, Nick stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie and rehearsing his sermon in his mind. He wore a mask of calm, but inside, turmoil raged. The tension was palpable as he thought about Betty, blissfully unaware of the fate that awaited her. He had convinced himself that this was the only way to protect his life, to preserve the image he had cultivated for so long. As he drove to the church, the weight of his decision pressed down on him like a leaden shroud. Each mile felt like a countdown to a tragedy that would forever alter the course of their lives. He could almost hear the ticking clock in his mind, a reminder that time was running out. Arriving at the church, Nick was greeted by familiar faces, parishioners who looked to him for guidance and inspiration. He delivered his sermon with practiced ease, his voice steady and authoritative. But beneath the surface, his mind was racing, consumed by thoughts of the impending crime. The juxtaposition of his public persona and the darkness lurking within him was jarring, a testament to the duality of his existence. As he spoke of love, forgiveness, and redemption, he couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. Here he was, a man of God, preaching about morality while simultaneously plotting the murder of his wife. The hypocrisy gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. After the service, Nick received congratulations and praise from his congregation, but all he could think about was the plan that was set in motion back at home. He had arranged for the assassins to arrive shortly after he left, ensuring that everything would unfold as he had orchestrated. The thought of what they would do to Betty sent chills down his spine, but he buried those feelings deep within. As he prepared to leave the church, Nick received a final message from the assassins, confirming the details of their arrival. "We'll take care of it," they assured him, their words cold and devoid of empathy. The finality of their message sent a wave of dread through him, but he steeled himself, reminding himself of the stakes. With one last look at the church he had dedicated his life to, Nick stepped into his car, the engine roaring to life as he drove away. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but he felt a twisted sense of relief. He was taking control of his destiny, even if it meant committing the ultimate betrayal. As he drove into the night, the weight of his decision settled heavily on his shoulders. The clock was ticking and soon the life he had known would be irrevocably altered. The chilling reality of his actions loomed large, and as he left the church behind, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line from which there would be no return. The night was shrouded in an unsettling stillness, the kind that often precedes a storm. In the small town of Illinois, the Coleman household lay quiet, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. Pastor Nick Coleman had left for his preaching engagement, leaving behind a home that would soon become the scene of a chilling crime. As the clock struck midnight, two figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by dark masks. The assassins had arrived, their hearts steeled for the task ahead. They had been given specific instructions, to execute the plan with precision and leave no trace behind. The air was thick with tension as they approached the house, their footsteps silent against the cool ground. Inside, Betty Coleman was fast asleep, blissfully unaware of the impending danger. The betrayal she had endured at the hands of her husband had left her emotionally drained, and she had sought solace in the comfort of her bed. But that comfort was about to be shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. The assassins slipped through the back door which Nick had left unlocked, a calculated move to ensure their entry. They moved with a chilling efficiency, their breaths steady as they navigated the darkened hallways. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, echoing with the silence of a life that was about to be extinguished. As they approached the bedroom, the lead assassin exchanged a glance with his partner, a silent confirmation of their grim task. They pushed the door open slowly, the creaking hinges breaking the stillness of the night. The sight before them was haunting. Betty lay peacefully in her bed, unaware of the fate that awaited her. In that moment, the gravity of their actions weighed heavily on them, but they quickly shook off any hesitation. This was a job and they were professionals. They had been paid to carry out a task and they intended to see it through. With swift movements, they approached the bed, the dim light casting eerie shadows across the room. Betty stirred slightly, sensing a disturbance in her dreams, but before she could fully awaken, the lead assassin lunged forward. In a matter of seconds, the tranquility of the night was shattered by the violence of the act. The struggle was brief but brutal. Betty's instincts kicked in as she fought against her attackers, but the element of surprise was on the assassin's side. They overpowered her with a cold efficiency, silencing her cries for help in an instant. The horror of the act was palpable, a visceral reminder of the fragility of life. As the assassins executed their grim task, the reality of what they were doing settled in. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the weight of their actions would haunt them forever. But in that moment, they were driven by the adrenaline of the act, focused solely on completing their mission. Once the deed was done, they quickly retreated from the scene, leaving behind a lifeless body and a home forever changed. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. They slipped back into the night, their hearts racing, but their minds already calculating their next move. Hours later, the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the town. It was a new day, but for Betty Coleman it would never come. The morning routine that had once filled the house with life was now replaced by an eerie stillness. When Betty's sister Laura arrived later that morning for a planned visit, she immediately sensed that something was wrong. The house was too quiet, and as she called out for her sister, a sense of dread washed over her. She pushed open the door to Betty's bedroom, and the sight that met her eyes was one she would never forget. Betty lay motionless on the bed, her face pale and lifeless. The horror of the scene struck Laura like a physical blow, and she stumbled back, her heart racing as panic set in. "No. Betty?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the house. The reality of the situation crashed down around her, and she quickly dialed 911, her hands shaking as she relayed the tragic news. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the morning calm. Officers rushed into the house, their faces grim as they assessed the scene. The initial shock of the discovery quickly gave way to a methodical investigation. They cordoned off the area, documenting every detail, every piece of evidence that could lead them to the truth behind this senseless act of violence. As the detectives began their work, questions swirled in the air. Who could have done this? Why would anyone want to harm Betty Coleman, a woman known for her kindness and compassion? The investigation was just beginning, and the answers were shrouded in mystery. In the days that followed, the community was rocked by the news of Betty's murder. The small town, once a place of safety and familiarity, was now gripped by fear and uncertainty. The loss of a beloved member of the community left a void that could never be filled, and whispers of betrayal and secrets began to circulate. As the police delved deeper into the investigation, they uncovered a tangled web of lies and deceit that would lead them to the heart of the tragedy. The question remained: who was responsible for this heinous act, and what dark secrets lay hidden beneath the surface of the Coleman family's seemingly perfect life? In the wake of Betty Coleman's shocking murder, the small town of Illinois was plunged into a state of disbelief and fear. The police quickly mobilized, launching an investigation that would uncover the dark secrets hidden beneath the surface of the Coleman family's seemingly perfect life. As detectives arrived at the crime scene, they were met with the grim reality of a life cut short, and the urgency to find answers weighed heavily on their shoulders. The initial assessment of the scene revealed no signs of forced entry, leading investigators to suspect that Betty knew her assailants. This detail raised immediate questions about who could have wanted to harm her. As the detectives began their work, they meticulously documented every piece of evidence, from the position of the body to the items in the room. Each detail was crucial in piecing together the events that led to this tragic outcome. As the investigation progressed, detectives turned their attention to Betty's personal life. They sought to understand the dynamics of her marriage to Pastor Nick Coleman, a man who had been revered in the community. Interviews with friends and family painted a picture of a woman who had been struggling with her husband's infidelity, a revelation that would soon become central to the investigation. Detectives discovered a series of text messages and emails between Betty and her sister Laura that revealed the depth of her turmoil. In these communications, Betty had confided her fears about Nick's affair with Murphy, the teenage boy she had taken in. "I don't know how much longer I can live like this," one message read. I feel like I'm losing him and I'm scared of what he might do if he feels cornered. These messages were a chilling insight into Betty's state of mind in the days leading up to her death. They indicated not only her awareness of the affair but also her growing fear for her safety. The detectives recognized that these communications could provide critical context for understanding the motive behind her murder. As they delved deeper into the investigation, the detectives sought to establish a timeline of events leading up to the night of the murder. They interviewed neighbors, friends, and church members, piecing together Betty's last known movements. Each conversation revealed more about the tension within the Coleman household, and the whispers of discontent began to surface. The detectives also focused on Pastor Nick, who had returned from his preaching engagement shortly after the murder. His alibi was scrutinized, and the detectives noted his emotional demeanor during questioning. While he expressed grief over Betty's death, there was an underlying tension in his responses that raised suspicions. He claimed to have been unaware of any threats to Betty's safety, but the detectives were not convinced. As the investigation unfolded, the detectives uncovered more evidence that pointed to the possibility of a premeditated act. They discovered that Nick had been in contact with individuals on the dark web, leading them to suspect that he may have orchestrated the murder. The chilling realization that a respected pastor could be involved in such a heinous act sent shockwaves through the investigation team. With each new lead, the detectives worked tirelessly to connect the dots. They analyzed Betty's phone records, searching for any additional communications that might shed light on her fears. It was during this process that they uncovered a series of calls made to a private number, which had gone unanswered. The detectives speculated that these calls could have been attempts by Betty to reach out for help, a desperate plea for assistance in a situation that had spiraled out of control. As the investigation progressed, the detectives also sought to interview Murphy, the teenage boy who had been at the center of the affair. His testimony could provide crucial insights into the dynamics of the Coleman household and the events leading up to Betty's murder. However, Murphy's whereabouts became increasingly difficult to trace, raising further questions about his involvement in the unfolding drama. The detectives faced mounting pressure to solve the case, as the community demanded answers. The media frenzy surrounding the murder only intensified, with headlines speculating about the pastor's potential involvement. As the investigation continued, the detectives remained focused on gathering evidence and building a case that would hold up in court. In a breakthrough moment, the detectives managed to trace the Bitcoin transaction linked to the assassins hired to carry out the murder. This discovery opened a new avenue of investigation, leading them to the dark web and the individuals who had facilitated the crime. The chilling realization that Nick had resorted to such measures to silence his wife sent shockwaves through the investigation team. As the detectives pieced together the evidence, they began to formulate a clearer picture of the events that had transpired. The combination of Betty's messages, the timeline of her last days, and the financial transactions linked to the murder created a compelling narrative of betrayal and desperation. With each passing day, the investigation drew closer to uncovering the truth behind Betty Coleman's tragic death. The detectives were determined to bring justice to a woman whose life had been cut short by the very person who had vowed to love and protect her. The stakes were high, and as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the chilling reality of the case became increasingly apparent. As the investigation into Betty Coleman's murder intensified, the detectives found themselves at a critical juncture. The evidence was mounting, but they needed a key witness to unlock the final pieces of the puzzle. That witness would come in the form of Murphy, the teenage boy whose relationship with Pastor Nick had ignited the tragic chain of events leading to Betty's death. Murphy had been living in a state of fear and confusion since the night of the murder. The weight of his involvement in the Coleman household hung heavily on his shoulders, and he was acutely aware of the danger he faced. As the police began to close in, he realized that his only chance of survival lay in cooperating with the authorities. The thought of turning against Nick, the man who had once been a father figure to him, filled him with dread, but the alternative was far worse. One evening, after days of contemplation, Murphy made the decision to reach out to the police. He contacted the detectives, requesting a meeting to share what he knew. The urgency in his voice conveyed the gravity of the situation, and the detectives quickly arranged to meet him at a neutral location, away from prying eyes. When Murphy arrived, he was visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he took a seat across from the detectives. The room was charged with tension as he prepared to divulge the secrets that had been weighing on him. "I need to tell you everything," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want any of this to happen." As he recounted his experiences, the detectives listened intently, knowing that Murphy's testimony could be the turning point in the investigation. He spoke of his relationship with Nick, detailing how the pastor had taken him in during a vulnerable time in his life. But as their bond deepened, Murphy began to sense the darkness lurking beneath Nick's facade. "I saw things I shouldn't have," Murphy confessed, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He explained how he had stumbled upon Nick's secret communications, messages exchanged with individuals on the dark web. "He was talking about getting rid of Betty," Murphy stammered, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. The detectives leaned forward, their interest piqued. "What do you mean by getting rid of her?" one of them asked, urgency creeping into his tone. Murphy took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to reveal. He was planning her murder. He said it was the only way to keep his life from falling apart. He was scared of losing everything, his church, his reputation. He thought if she found out about the affair, she would ruin him. The detectives exchanged glances, the gravity of Murphy's testimony sinking in. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. They pressed him for more details, and Murphy recounted the chilling conversations he had overheard, the plans Nick had laid out in cold, calculated terms. "He talked about hiring someone to do it," Murphy continued, his voice trembling. "He said he'd pay them in Bitcoin so it wouldn't be traceable. I didn't want to believe it at first, but then I realized he was serious." As Murphy spoke, the emotional conflict within him became evident. He had once looked up to Nick, admired him as a mentor and father figure. But now, he was faced with the reality that the man he had trusted was capable of unspeakable violence. The betrayal cut deep, and Murphy struggled with the weight of his decision to turn against Nick. "I didn't want to be involved in any of this," he admitted, tears welling in his eyes. "But I can't live with the guilt of knowing what he did. I didn't want Betty to die. She was good to me. She didn't deserve this." The detectives offered him reassurance, emphasizing that his cooperation could help bring justice for Betty. They understood the difficult position he was in, and they encouraged him to share everything he knew. Murphy's testimony would not only provide crucial evidence against Nick but also serve as a means of redemption for himself. As the interview continued, Murphy revealed more about the night of the murder. He had been at the house earlier that evening, helping Nick prepare for his preaching engagement. "I left before it happened," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought I was just helping him with his problems." The detectives took meticulous notes, aware that each detail could be pivotal in building their case. They asked Murphy about any potential witnesses or additional evidence that could corroborate his story. He mentioned the encrypted messages he had seen on Nick's phone, indicating that there might be digital evidence of the assassination plot. With each revelation, the detectives felt a renewed sense of urgency. They knew they had to act quickly to apprehend Nick before he could potentially flee or destroy evidence. Murphy's testimony had provided them with the critical information they needed to move forward, but they also understood the emotional toll it had taken on him. As the meeting concluded, the detectives assured Murphy that they would protect him and that his cooperation would not go unnoticed. They understood the gravity of his decision to come forward, and they promised to do everything in their power to ensure his safety. In the days that followed, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Armed with Murphy's testimony and the evidence he had provided, the detectives moved swiftly to gather the necessary warrants to search Nick's home and seize his electronic devices. The walls that had once protected the pastor were beginning to close in, and the truth was finally coming to light. Murphy's decision to testify marked a pivotal moment in the investigation, one that would ultimately lead to the unraveling of a carefully constructed facade. As the detectives prepared to confront Nick, the chilling reality of the case loomed large. The community that had once revered him was about to learn the truth about the man they had trusted, and the consequences of betrayal would soon be laid bare. As the sun rose over the small town of Illinois, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The trial of Pastor Nick Coleman was set to begin, and the community that had once revered him was now gripped by a mix of curiosity and horror. The courtroom, filled with friends, family, and members of the congregation, buzzed with whispers as everyone awaited the proceedings that would reveal the truth behind Betty Coleman's tragic murder. The prosecution, led by a seasoned attorney known for her tenacity, was prepared to present a compelling case against Nick. They aimed to paint a picture of a man driven by desperation and betrayal, willing to go to any lengths to protect his reputation. The evidence gathered during the investigation, including Murphy's testimony and the digital communications that linked Nick to the assassination plot, would serve as the backbone of their argument. As the trial commenced, the judge called the court to order, and the atmosphere shifted from anticipation to tension. The prosecution began by outlining the timeline of events leading up to Betty's murder, detailing the emotional turmoil she had faced in her marriage. They presented Betty's text messages to her sister, revealing her fears and the chilling knowledge she had about Nick's affair. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutor read aloud Betty's words, her vulnerability echoing through the room. Betty Coleman was a woman who loved deeply, the prosecutor stated, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. She was betrayed by the very man who vowed to protect her. This trial is about justice for Betty, a woman whose life was cut short by the man she trusted most. The emotional weight of the prosecution's case resonated with the audience, many of whom had known Betty personally. Tears filled the eyes of her friends and family as they listened to the heartbreaking details of her life and the betrayal she endured. The courtroom was a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of deceit. As the prosecution continued, they called Murphy to the stand. The young man, visibly shaken, recounted his experiences living in the Coleman household. His testimony was raw and emotional, revealing the internal conflict he faced in turning against Nick. "I didn't want to believe he could do something like this," Murphy said, his voice trembling. "But I couldn't stay silent. Betty didn't deserve this." The defense, led by a skilled attorney known for his ability to manipulate narratives, sought to undermine Murphy's credibility. He painted Nick as a victim of circumstance, a man who had made mistakes but was not a murderer. "Pastor Nick Coleman is a man of God," the defense attorney argued. "He made poor choices, yes, but that does not make him a killer. This is a tragic situation, but it is not a crime." The defense strategy hinged on creating doubt in the minds of the jurors. They attempted to discredit Murphy's testimony, suggesting that the young man had ulterior motives for turning against Nick. Murphy was living in a chaotic environment, the defense attorney claimed. He was confused and scared. His testimony is not reliable. However, the emotional testimonies from Betty's family and friends began to sway the jury. They spoke of Betty's kindness, her dedication to her family, and the love she had for her husband, despite his infidelities. "She was a good person," her sister Laura testified, her voice breaking. "She didn't deserve to die. She was scared and she reached out for help. We failed her." As the trial progressed, the courtroom drama intensified. The prosecution presented evidence of Nick's digital communications, revealing the chilling conversations he had with the assassins on the dark web. The jurors listened intently as the prosecutor detailed how Nick had plotted to silence Betty, a revelation that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. In a pivotal moment, the prosecution played a recording of a phone call between Nick and one of the assassins. The chilling nature of the conversation left the audience in stunned silence. "I need this done quickly," Nick's voice echoed through the courtroom. "I can't afford any mistakes." The gravity of his words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the man who had once stood before his congregation as a pillar of virtue. The defense attempted to downplay the significance of the recording, arguing that it was taken out of context. Nick was in a desperate situation, the defense attorney insisted. "He was not himself. This does not prove he is a murderer." But the damage was done, and the jurors were left grappling with the reality of Nick's actions. As the trial neared its conclusion, the emotional toll on everyone involved became palpable. The courtroom was filled with tension as the jury prepared to deliberate. The weight of the evidence, combined with the emotional testimonies, created a complex narrative that would ultimately determine Nick's fate. In the final moments of the trial, the prosecution delivered a powerful closing argument, urging the jury to seek justice for Betty. "This is not just about Pastor Nick Coleman," the prosecutor implored. "This is about a woman who lost her life at the hands of someone she loved. We owe it to her memory to hold him accountable." As the jury left to deliberate, the tension in the courtroom was thick. Friends and family of Betty held their breath, praying for justice. The outcome of the trial would not only determine Nick's fate but also serve as a reflection of the community's values and their commitment to seeking justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. The trial of Pastor Nick Coleman had become a gripping saga of betrayal, love, and the quest for justice. As the community awaited the jury's decision, the echoes of Betty's story lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of betrayal. The tragic story of Betty Coleman and Pastor Nick Coleman serves as a haunting reminder of the complexities of human relationships, the fragility of trust, and the devastating consequences of betrayal. As the dust settles from the courtroom drama, the impact of these events reverberates through the lives of everyone involved, leaving scars that may never fully heal. For Murphy, the young man caught in the crossfire of this tragic tale, the decision to testify against Nick was not just an act of self-preservation. It was a profound moral reckoning. He faced the emotional turmoil of turning against a figure he once admired, grappling with guilt and fear. In choosing to speak out, Murphy sought redemption, but he also became a symbol of the courage it takes to confront uncomfortable truths. His journey reflects the struggle many face when forced to choose between loyalty and integrity. The church community, once a sanctuary of faith and support, now finds itself fractured. The betrayal of a beloved pastor has left congregants questioning their beliefs and the very foundation of their trust. How could someone they revered as a moral leader commit such a heinous act? The fallout from this tragedy will linger, prompting deep reflections on the nature of faith, morality, and the hidden secrets that can lie beneath the surface of even the most seemingly perfect lives. As for Nick, the man who once stood at the pulpit, he now faces the consequences of his actions. The trial exposed the darkness that had festered within him, revealing a man who allowed his fears and desires to overshadow his moral compass. The question remains: can redemption be found for someone who has committed such an unforgivable act? This story compels us to reflect on the themes of trust, love, and the hidden secrets that can destroy lives. It challenges us to consider how well we truly know those we love and the lengths to which people will go to protect their own interests. As we conclude this harrowing tale, we invite you to share your thoughts. What do you believe are the true costs of betrayal? How do we navigate the complexities of trust in our own lives? Join the conversation by leaving your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping true crime stories that delve into the darkest corners of human nature. Your engagement helps us continue to explore these vital themes and share the stories that matter.